Good day, guys, and welcome to WepTech Academy. My name is Mr. Luis, and I'll be taking you on the course Video Graphics and Motion Design. Now, throughout this course, we'll be looking at a lot of things. We'll be going through video graphics as a whole. We're going to look at design principles for motion graphics. We'll look at video editing and compositing and a lot more stuff. As we will advance in the course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and ask. If you don't understand anything, if you feel uneasy with anything or uncomfortable with any of the topics or any of the modules, feel free to reach out to me. Without any further ado, guys, let's go straight into the course. Okay, so we will begin with module 1, which is Introduction to Motion Design and Video Graphics. In this module, the first thing we'll have to take note of is the definition of key concepts and terms in motion design and video graphics. So to begin with, we must answer the question, what is motion design? And before we go to the definition I've provided there for us, please, I want us to take note that there is no universally standard definition for motion design. That is to say, there are many definitions of motion design depending on who is explaining it and his understanding of motion design. So there is no universal standard definition of motion design. But what we have here, you see, as I've put down for you, it says motion design, also known as motion graphic design, refers to the discipline of putting graphic design elements into motion in order to convey a message or tell a story. These elements are at times combined with audio and for use in multimedia projects. That is to tell us that motion design is simply putting graphic elements into motion, that's animating them, which can be used to convey a message or tell a story, and at times it can be used with audio in multimedia projects, maybe for TV or a movie and so on. I want you to take note of the fact that the term motion design is simply just a short form for motion graphic design. So at times they are used interchangeably. That is, you can decide to say motion design or you can decide to say motion graphic design. Depends on you. So before we move to the next key definition, I want us to take note that motion design uses primarily graphics, and these graphics I'm talking about could be objects, they could be logos, they could be icons, they could be symbols and text. So that is to say that for us to carry out the motion design process, we will obviously need some text or symbols. The next thing we'll be looking at is what motion graphics is. Remember, I've been talking about motion design being the discipline of putting graphic elements into animation. So now, what is motion graphics? Now, motion graphics is the output of the motion design process. Are we together? That is, motion graphics now are the output of the motion design process. That is, the output of the animated objects is what is called motion graphics. Even though at times some designers do refer to the motion design process as motion graphics, but primarily motion graphics is just the output of the motion design process. So I'm just saying that to get you clarified. So maybe along your journey as a motion graphic designer, you may hear some designers call the process of motion design motion graphics. So it does happen. Now, furthermore, the person who specializes in the discipline of motion graphic design is called a motion graphic designer, obviously. Yes, someone who specializes in doing motion graphic designs is a motion graphic designer. So having understood what motion graphics in and where motion designer in and what motion design is, the next thing we want to look at are the tools used in creating motion graphics. The tools used in creating motion graphics. Now, motion graphics can be created using software like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe After Effects, Cinema 4D, or online platforms like Canva, Bytable, and Animaker. I know some of this software may sound strange to you because you may not be used to them or may have never heard about them before. There is actually no need to be worried, because when you get into the full details of motion design, you have the understanding of them. So there's nothing to be bothered about. Remember, this is just an introduction. It's just an introductory class. So whatever we are doing here is still on the surface. When we get into deeper and more detailed things, you'll get to understand the software.
Okay, guys, so moving on to the next subtopic, we will have the categories of motion graphics. The categories of motion graphics. Well, I want us to understand that every motion graphic which you will produce as a motion designer will fall under these two main categories. Any motion graphics you're going to come up with as a motion designer will fall under these two main categories, and that is going to be 2D and 3D. That's 2D and 3D. And the term 2D simply stands for two-dimensional, and 3D stands for three-dimensional. And for 2D motion graphics done in 2D or two-dimensional are usually flat and basic and have no depth, while those done in 3D or three-dimensional motion graphics have depth. And the two-dimensional motion graphics, as we have seen written there, usually use just the X and the Y axis for animation, while the 3D uses the X, Y, and Z axis. That is, the 3D graphics have depth.
Okay, guys, so as I'm saying, in animation, movement is done in animation along axis. Are we together? Like taking, for example, this second diagram here, it shows a diagram with the X axis, which is the horizontal axis, and the Y axis, which is the vertical axis. Now, this represents animation in 2D, that's two-dimensional. See, even just going by the name two-dimensional shows that movement moves. There's movement in the animation only in two ways, either along the x-axis or along the y-axis. And movement along the x-axis is either forward or backward, while movement along the y-axis is either upward or downward. So in 2D animation, the movement is only along the x-axis and the y-axis. Are we together? While in 3D animation, we see this first diagram here, this black one, which the mouse is hovering over. The movement is along X, Y, and Z axis is an additional axis. This Z axis gives the animation depth. It will not be flat like a 2D animation, two-dimensional. It's now three-dimensional. Are we together? Just by the name, see now there are three axes in three dimensions. Are we together?
Okay, guys, in order for us to really understand what I'm explaining about these 2 dimension and 3 dimensions, I've provided for us some practical examples for us to look at.
For example, this first video is an example of what we call 2D graphics. You see, they are flat and simple, and as what I've explained, they are flat. They are basically flat. Okay, so that is it for the two-dimensional graphics. Meanwhile, the three-dimensional graphics, if you look at them, you see they are not flat. They have depth. That is, they are not as flat as the two-dimensional graphics. They have a degree of depth. Okay, guys, so that is it for this lesson. So see you in the next tutorial.